Hello, dear traveler. Welcome back to our little haven of calm. Here, you'll find a gentle patter of rain on the window, the soft crackle of a distant fireplace, and a story meant to carry you off to sleep like a warm, soothing breeze. Today's tale is called The Blue Bead from a Broken Bracelet. A story of love, time, and those tiny things that hold our hearts together when life tries to pull them apart. So get comfortable, let your shoulders relax, and let us begin. Part 1. The Attic Shoebox. The attic stairs creaked under my weight, same as they had when I was a kid sneaking up to raid Mom's holiday cookie tins. That familiar mix of cedar and mildew hit me first, followed by the soft hush of sunlight filtering through cobwebbed windows. I was here to sort through her things, but most days, I just sat on the dusty floor, running my fingers over photo albums or her old knitting needles, wondering how a life could fit into cardboard boxes. Then I saw it, a beat-up Converse shoebox tucked behind my high school yearbooks. The lid was fastened with twine, the label faded but still readable, Michael's Things 1985. My heart gave a little kick. Mom had always been a hoarder of moments, not just objects. Inside, beneath a layer of yellow tissue paper, was a velvet pouch so worn the blue had turned to gray. When I reached in, my fingertips met something smooth, cool, a glass bead, cobalt blue, the size of a thumbnail. Time folded in on itself. Suddenly I wasn't kneeling in a sunlit attic in 2023, but standing in the doorway of the University of Chicago Library in October 1985, watching a girl with messy brown hair and a too-big cardigan juggle a stack of papers and a paper bag of blueberry muffins. She tripped over her own feet, classic Lena, and the bag had spilled, muffins rolling across the linoleum. I rushed to help, and when she looked up to thank me, her smile was so bright it felt like a punch to the chest. That was the day I noticed the bracelet on her wrist, a simple thing, silver chain with 7 blue beads, each one catching the light as she moved. I didn't know it then, but that bracelet would become the thread that wove through every chapter of my life. Mom's shoebox held more than just a bead, though. Under the pouch was a dried pressed flower, probably from our wedding bouquet, and a receipt for 2 tickets to a Cubs game, date stamped June 12, 1986. The day we skipped studying to sit in the bleachers, sharing a hot dog and laughing at how bad Lena was at keeping score. Now, holding the bead, I could almost smell the rain from that autumn afternoon, feel the way Lena's shoulder had brushed mine as we knelt to pick up those muffins. "They're still edible," she insisted, brushing crumbs off the top one and taking a bite. "See, perfection is overrated." Her words had stuck with me, funny enough, considering how hard we later tried to build a life that looked perfect from the outside, the suburban house, the good jobs, the well-behaved kid. The bead rolled between my fingers, smooth except for a tiny nick on one side. How had I never noticed that before? Maybe because back then, we were too busy looking at the whole bracelet, the shiny promise of it, to care about small flaws. Now, though, that nick felt significant, like a fingerprint from time itself. I wondered if Lena still had the bracelet. The last time I'd seen her was at Mom's funeral, 2 years ago. She'd worn a simple black dress, her hair streaked with silver, and when she hugged me, I'd caught a whiff of her old perfume, jasmine and something citrusy. We'd talked about the weather, about Sophie's new job in New York, but we hadn't mentioned the bracelet, or the way we'd let 30 years slip by like spilled muffins on a library floor. Sunlight shifted, casting a rectangle of gold over the shoebox. I set the bead back inside, careful not to disturb the other mementos. Up here, in the quiet of the attic, time felt malleable, like I could reach out and touch the boy I'd been, the girl who'd laughed at spilled muffins and taught me that imperfection was where the magic lived. Maybe that's why Mom had kept this box. Not to preserve the past, but to remind someone, maybe me, that the things we lose aren't really lost. They're just waiting for us to dig them out of an old shoebox, to let them whisper stories into the present, soft as a lullaby. Part 2. Chicago's autumn rain. That October day had been the kind of rainy that soaks through your bones, the kind where the air smells like wet concrete and old books. I'd been camped out in the library's third-floor corner, nose deep in a political science textbook, trying to ignore the way my sneakers squelched from the walkover. The room was a symphony of soft sounds, pages turning, typewriters clacking. This was before everyone had laptops, you know, and the distant rumble of a radiator kicking on. Then came the crash. I looked up to see a girl, Lena, though I didn't know her name yet, on her hands and knees, papers and muffins scattered around her like confetti. Her cardigan was slipping off one shoulder, revealing a strap of her tank top, and her hair was a frizzed mess from the rain, but she was laughing, actually laughing, as she grabbed for a muffin that had rolled under a nearby desk. "Sorry," she said to no one in particular, "I promise I'm not usually this clumsy." I was up and moving before I could think, kneeling to help her collect her things. The papers were all economics notes, covered in messy equations and margin doodles of little stick figures wearing graduation caps. The muffins, blueberry by the smell, were in a grease-stained bag from the diner down the street, Mabel's, where all the grad students went for cheap coffee and even cheaper pie. "They're a peace offering," she explained when she saw me eyeing the bag. "I'm presenting my thesis proposal today, and I brought bribes." As I handed her the last muffin, something caught the light on her wrist, that blue bead bracelet, 7 beads strung on a delicate silver chain. It seemed too pretty for someone who moved through the world like a hurricane, all flailing arms and bright smiles. "Nice bracelet," I said, because I couldn't think of anything else. She held up her wrist, rotating it so the beads caught the fluorescent lights. "Got it with my first scholarship check," she said. I told myself each bead represents a year I won't let anyone tell me I'm not smart enough to be here. There was a fierceness in her voice then, one that cut through the laughter and the clumsiness. I'd later learned that Lena was the first in her family to go to college, that she'd worked nights as a waitress to pay for textbooks, that she carried herself with a kind of determined joy that made everyone around her want to smile too. But in that moment, all I knew was that I wanted to hear more of her stories, to understand what made someone so bright in a room full of people hunched over their studies like they were trying to disappear. We talked for hours that day, right there on the library floor, while the rain hammered the windows and her thesis proposal lay forgotten beside us. She told me about growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, how she'd fallen in love with economics because it felt like solving a puzzle to help people, not just numbers on a page. I told her about my own plans to go into public policy, how I wanted to make a difference but sometimes felt like I was just memorizing facts to pass exams. Life's not a multiple choice question, she said, pulling a muffin from the bag and breaking it in half, offering me a piece. The crumbs fell onto her cardigan, but she didn't care. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Hell, I don't even know if my proposal's any good, and I'm the one writing it. She took a bite, crumb sticking to her lips, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. By the time the rain let up, the library was closing, and we exchanged numbers on a scrap of her thesis notes. She scribbled it next to a particularly messy equation, adding a little smiley face at the end. As we walked out into the damp evening, she paused, shaking out her hair like a dog, and the bracelet slid down her wrist, catching on the cuff of her cardigan. "Don't lose this," she said, tapping the beads lightly, "it's my lucky charm." I didn't realize until later that she'd left one of the muffins in my bag, a silent promise that this wasn't just a one-time thing. That muffin, slightly squashed but still warm, sat on my desk for days, a reminder of the girl with the blue bead bracelet who taught me that sometimes, the best things in life happen when you're brave enough to drop your guard and your muffins for someone new. Part 3. Promises by Lake Michigan. 3 months later, the air had that sharp, electric tang of early summer, the kind that makes you believe anything's possible. I'd been working shifts at the campus bookstore, saving every dollar from selling used paperbacks and ringing up overpriced coffee mugs emblazoned with the university logo. Lena didn't know it, but I'd been eyeing a little jewelry store downtown, the kind with dusty display cases and a clerk who smelled like mint candy. The bracelet there wasn't identical to hers. This one had 9 beads instead of 7, each a deeper, richer blue, like the heart of a flame, but it felt right. I asked her to meet me at the lakefront after her final exam. She showed up in cut-off jeans and a faded Cubs t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, still flushed from sprinting across campus. "You sounded serious on the phone," she said, poking my arm. "Everything okay?" I didn't answer right away, too busy trying to steady my hands as I pulled the velvet box from my pocket. The sun was dipping low, turning the lake into a sheet of liquid gold, and the distant chatter of kids on the pier felt miles away. "Remember when you said each bead on your bracelet was a year you'd prove you belonged?" I opened the box, watching her eyes widen at the sight of the new bracelet. I thought, maybe we could start counting together. Each bead can be a day we build something, or a moment we don't have to prove anything to anyone. My voice cracked a little on the last part. God, I was nervous. But Lena just stood there, silent, her fingers hovering over the box like she was afraid to touch it. Then she laughed, that bright, ringing laugh that always made my chest feel lighter, and threw her arms around me, nearly knocking the box into the grass. "You dork," she murmured into my shoulder, "you didn't have to buy me anything." But when she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes, catching the sunset like tiny jewels. "Put it on me," she said, holding out her wrist, "but first, let us make a deal." I fumbled with the clasp, my fingers clumsy with relief and affection. The metal was cool against her skin, but her wrist itself was warm, alive, thrumming with the same rapid pulse I felt in my own neck. "What kind of deal?" I asked, finally securing the bracelet. She turned to face the lake, lifting her wrists so the beads caught the last rays of sunlight, each one glowing like a tiny moon. "No more proving anything," she said, linking her pinky through mine, a childhood gesture that felt impossibly tender. "No more worrying if we're smart enough, or good enough, or ready enough. Just us, taking each day as it comes, even if it means stepping in a few puddles or dropping a few muffins." She paused, then added, quieter, "And if a bead falls off, we'll just pick it up and keep going. Sound good?" I looked out at the skyline, the Willis Tower, still the Sears Tower back then, piercing the orange haze, and felt something settle in my chest. This wasn't the grand, sweeping promise I'd rehearsed in my head, no declarations of forever, no vows written in stone. It was better, a commitment to the messy, beautiful in-between, to trusting that we could build something solid without knowing exactly what it would look like. We stayed there until the stars came out, Lena tracing the beads on her new bracelet like she was memorizing their shape, their weight. Every now and then, she'd nudge me with her shoulder, or point out a shooting star over the lake, and each time, the bracelet would glint in the darkness, a silent witness to our whispered plans, road trips to Wisconsin to meet her family, dinner parties in our tiny grad student apartment, someday maybe a house with a porch where we could watch the sunset together for the rest of our lives. Later, as we walked back to campus, Lena stopped to pick a dandelion from the grass, blowing the seeds into the night. "You know," she said, "I used to think happiness was about reaching a finish line, grad school, a good job, a perfect life. But now," she smiled, the bracelet gleaming against her wrist, "now I think it's about letting someone else hold the map, even when you're not sure which way to go." I didn't know it then, but that bracelet would become more than a piece of jewelry. It would be a talisman through late-night study sessions, through the stress of job applications, through the exhilarating, terrifying early days of parenthood. And yes, through the times when we forgot to hold hands, when the map got lost, when the beads started to feel less like promises and more like a burden. But in that moment, with the lake breeze in our hair and the world stretched out before us like an open book, all that mattered was the warmth of her hand in mine, and the quiet certainty that we were writing a story worth telling. Part 4. The Christmas Eve Accident. Christmas Eve 1989 smelled like cinnamon and pine, the air thick with the warmth of a fire that had been crackling all day. Sophie was just 14 months old, wobbly on her chubby legs but determined to explore every inch of the living room, especially the tree, which she kept trying to hug like it was a giant, sparkly friend. Lena and I had spent the morning wrapping presents in mismatched paper, sipping eggnog that had maybe a little too much removes, and laughing at how Sophie kept trying to eat the ribbon. The accident happened during our little gift exchange. Lena had just handed Sophie a plush elephant, and our girl was so excited she stumbled forward, arms outstretched, squealing "Mama" at the top of her lungs. Lena caught her mid-air, pulling her into a hug, but there was a sharp snap, the sound of metal giving way, and suddenly blue beads were raining down around them, catching the light from the tree like tiny ornaments themselves. "Oh no," Lena said, but she was smiling, even as Sophie squirmed to get down and chase the beads rolling across the carpet. Guess someone's hugs are too strong for jewelry. I knelt to pick up a bead near the fireplace, still warm from the flames, and realized it was the one I'd fastened that summer by the lake. The clasp had snapped clean off, the chain dangling loose on Lena's wrist. We spent the next half hour crawling around on the floor, Sophie giggling as she batted at the beads like a kitten. Lena kept losing track of which ones she'd already collected, dropping them into the empty eggnog bowl with a soft clink. "How many do you think we've lost?" she asked, squinting at the bowl. "6 beads, but the bracelet had 9. "3, I said, same as the number of times Sophie tried to eat the tree today. Lena laughed, a rich, warm sound that made the room feel even cozier. She sat back on her heels, holding up the broken bracelet. "You know," she said, twirling a bead between her fingers, "maybe losing a few isn't so bad. What if each missing bead is a surprise waiting to happen, like, one day we'll find one in a sock, or under the couch, and it'll remind us of this exact moment, chaotic, a little messy, but perfect anyway." I loved her for that, the way she could take a broken thing and see the beauty in the cracks. Back then, we still believed that nothing was permanent, that even mistakes and accidents were just part of the story we were writing. Sophie crawled into my lap, clutching 2 beads like treasure, and Lena leaned over to kiss her sticky cheek, the bracelet still dangling from her wrist. "We'll fix it," I said, though I wasn't sure how jewelry repair wasn't exactly in our budget. But Lena just shrugged. "Or we won't. Maybe it's better to let it be for now. Life's more interesting with a few missing pieces, don't you think?" By the time we went to bed, we'd found 2 of the 3 lost beads, one under the coffee table, another wedged between the couch cushions. The third remained missing, a tiny mystery in our tiny apartment. Lena set the bracelet on her nightstand, next to a photo of us at the lake the summer we'd met, and I remember thinking how lucky we were, young, in love, with a baby who filled our days with noise and joy, even if she did break our favorite jewelry. The next morning, Christmas Day, Sophie woke us by dumping the bowl of beads onto our bed, laughing as they bounced across the covers. Lena scooped her up, beads spilling into the sheets, and we ate pancakes in bed, syrup dripping onto the comforter, not caring about the mess. The missing bead, we never found it that night, but somehow, it didn't feel important. We had each other, we had Sophie, we had a life that felt full to the brim, even with a few gaps. Looking back, That Christmas Eve was a turning point, not because the bracelet broke, but because it showed us that love isn't about keeping everything perfect. It's about kneeling on the floor together, searching for what's been lost, and laughing while you do it. The bracelet would get fixed eventually. I used a cheap clasp from a craft store, which kept snagging on Lena's sweaters, but the memory of those scattered beads, and Lena's smile as she suggested they held secrets, stayed with me forever. Some losses, it turns out, are just invitations for new stories to find their way in. Part 5. The Washing Machine Miracle. 3 days after Christmas, I was folding laundry in the tiny utility room off our kitchen, one of those chores that feels never-ending when you have a toddler, when Lena let out a yelp from the laundry basket. "Michael, you've got to see this." I found her kneeling on the floor, holding up my gray wool sock like it was a treasure map, a tiny cobalt bead peeking out from the heel, warm from the dryer. "It was hiding in your sock," she said, her eyes bright with triumph. "Told you it would come back." The bead was slightly scuffed, as if it had gone on its own little adventure through the washing machine, but otherwise intact. Lena threaded it back onto the bracelet with a pair of tweezers I'd borrowed from my desk, her tongue sticking out in concentration. "There," she said, fastening the jury-rigged clasp, the craft store special, still prone to snagging, good as new, or better, maybe. She held up her wrist, the 9 beads now complete again, and I noticed the one from the sock sat a little crooked, like it had earned its place through perseverance. That night, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep exhausted from a day of helping us fold towels, we ate cold pizza at the kitchen table, steam rising from mugs of reheated coffee. Lena slid her hand across the table, bracelet clinking against the salt shaker, and laced her fingers through mine. "Remember when we thought losing that bead was a disaster?" she said, biting into a slice of pepperoni. "Turns out, it just needed a detour through your sock." I laughed, but there was a tinge of sadness too. We'd been stressing over our first home's down payment for weeks, poring over spreadsheets late into the night, arguing about whether we could afford the slightly bigger apartment with the drafty windows. The bracelet, once a symbol of carefree promises, now felt like a relic from a time when we had fewer responsibilities, fewer numbers to worry about. But here, with Lena's hand in mine and the rediscovered bead glinting in the lamplight, those worries felt a little smaller. "You know," she said, swirling her coffee, "maybe we should start a tradition. Every time something goes missing and comes back, we celebrate with pizza and bad coffee." I snorted. "Or maybe we should just appreciate the fact that some things find their way home, even when we think they're gone for good." She nodded, her thumb brushing over the bead in her sock, the one that had taken 3 days and a washing machine cycle to reappear. It wasn't just the bead that felt like a miracle that night. It was the way Lena could take a mundane moment folding laundry, eating cold pizza, and turn it into something sacred, a reminder that our life together was made up of these small, interconnected joys. The bracelet, now with its slightly wonky bead and jury-rigged clasp, became a metaphor for us, not perfect, a little battered around the edges, but still holding on, still shining in the places that mattered. In the years that followed, that bead would come to symbolize so much more than a lost trinket. It would remind me of the way Lena's laughter could cut through stress, of the way we'd huddled together in that tiny apartment, dreaming of a future that felt both terrifying and thrilling. And whenever I'd find something I thought was lost, a favorite pen, a childhood photo, even a sense of calm amid the chaos, I'd think of her words, "Some things know their way home." Maybe that's the real magic of love, isn't it? Not in the grand gestures or the perfect moments, but in the quiet miracles, the beads that turn up in socks, the laughter over cold pizza, the way someone's hand still feels like home, even after 1,000 tiny storms. That night, as we finished the pizza and washed the mugs, Lena's bracelet caught on the edge of the sink, but she just laughed, unhooked it gently, and set it on the windowsill, where the moonlight could touch it. No need to stress over a snagged clasp when you're too busy counting the blessings of a life that, for all its flaws, was ours. Every bead, every scar, every perfect imperfection. Part 6. The 90s Dusk. The move to Connecticut happened in a blur of packing boxes and Sophie's excited chatter about her new big girl room. We traded our Chicago apartment for a 2-story house with a picket fence and a driveway that always needed shoveling, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine if you ignored the boxes of Lena's unread journals still sitting in the garage, 6 months after the move. Lena stopped wearing the bracelet around then. "It snags on the dishwasher gloves," she'd say with a shrug, tossing it into the bathroom drawer like it was just another forgotten utensil. I didn't think much of it at first. She was busy with playdates and PTA meetings, and I was buried in meetings for my new job at a consulting firm, the kind that paid well but demanded weekends in hotels and phone calls at 2 a.m. Her economics papers, once scattered across our kitchen table with margin doodles, now lay stacked neatly in the guest room, untouched. I'd find her sometimes staring at them, her fingers tracing the equations like they were old friends she'd lost touch with, but she never mentioned going back to work. "Sophie needs me here," she'd say, though our daughter was already in 1st grade, thriving in school. The distance grew slowly, like a shadow stretching at sunset, subtle, almost unnoticeable until it swallowed the light. I'd come home late, smelling of airport coffee and stale suits, while Lena stayed up watching reruns, the bracelet still in the drawer, the beads gathering dust alongside her dreams. We talked about carpool schedules and grocery lists, but not about the way her laughter had dimmed, or the way my deadlines felt more important than her quiet "How was your day?" over microwaved leftovers. Then came the stormy night in 1997. I was in a hotel room in Boston, staring at a spreadsheet that might as well have been written in Greek, when my cell phone rang. Lena's number, but her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Sophie," she was playing with the bracelet, she said, static crackling over the line, and it broke again. "She's upset, keeps saying she ruined Mommy's special thing." I could hear Sophie's muffled sobs in the background, the kind that twist your gut into knots. "I'll catch the next train," I said, already grabbing my suitcase, but Lena hesitated. "No, it's fine." It's just a bracelet. I shouldn't have called. The words hung there, heavier than the storm outside. Just a bracelet, but we both knew it was more than that. It was a link to a time when we had fewer responsibilities, when promises felt lighter, when we laughed at spilled muffins instead of tiptoeing around each other's exhaustion. When I got home the next morning, the house was quiet, Sophie at school, Lena in the kitchen staring at the broken bracelet on the counter. 3 beads were missing this time, the clasp bent beyond repair. I tried to fix it, she said, holding up a pair of pliers with tiny scratches on the tips, but I guess some things aren't meant to be put back together the same way. I wanted to hug her, to tell her we get it fixed, maybe even buy a new one, but my throat felt tight. When had we become so cautious with each other, like we were strangers sharing a house instead of partners who once counted beads as promises? The bracelet lay between us, broken, and for the first time, I wondered if we were fixing it for Sophie, or for ourselves, clinging to a symbol that had long since lost its meaning. Lena slid the bracelet into a Ziploc bag and tucked it into the junk drawer, next to old batteries and a half-eaten roll of tape. Maybe we'll revisit it later, she said, but later felt like a foreign concept then, buried under car payments and career goals and the endless to-do list of middle-class life. That night, I found her in Sophie's room, watching our daughter sleep, her hand resting on the little girl's back. The street light cast a faint glow on Lena's profile, highlighting the new lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders hunched like she was carrying a weight she wouldn't let me see. I thought of the library girl who laughed at spilled muffins, who worn that bracelet like a badge of honor, and wondered when we stopped seeing each other beyond the roles we taken on: dad, mom, breadwinner, caretaker. The bracelet stayed in the junk drawer for months, until one day Lena moved it to her jewelry box, a silent acknowledgement that some things need time to heal, just like people. We didn't talk about it much after that, too busy chasing the next milestone, the next promotion, the next version of perfect that always seemed just out of reach. But every time I opened that junk drawer, catching a glimpse of cobalt blue through the plastic, I feel a pang, a reminder of what we had, and what we were slowly losing, one missed moment at a time. Part 7. Cracks on the kitchen counter. The spring of 2005 smelled of rain and resignation, the kind of dampness that clings to your bones even when the sun comes out. Lena had been quiet for weeks, her silence a weight I couldn't ignore. Then one morning, as I poured coffee into my world's best dad mug, a gift from Sophie, now 12 and already rolling her eyes at my jokes, she said, "I think we need to take a break." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she stacked dishes in the sink, dishes from a breakfast we'd eaten in silence, the only sound the clink of silverware and Sophie's sneakers on the stairs. I don't remember what I said next, probably something stupid, like "What do you mean?" as if the past 5 years of missed anniversaries and late-night arguments hadn't already spelled it out. She packed her suitcase in the bedroom we'd shared for a decade, folding sweaters I hadn't seen her wear in years. I stood in the doorway, watching her methodically roll socks into balls, wondering when we'd stop being the kind of people who fought, who felt something, and became the kind who just existed, side by side but worlds apart. That S when the bracelet fell out of her nightstand drawer, a sad, tangled thing, missing 2 beads, the clasp bent at a permanent angle. It landed on the carpet with a soft thud, beads dull against the beige fibers. Lena paused, then knelt to pick it up, holding it like a forgotten letter. "You should keep this," she said, pressing it into my hand, her fingers barely brushing mine. "Maybe someone can fix it someday." I stared at the bracelet, at the empty spaces where beads used to be, and thought of the library floor, the way she laughed as muffin crumbs stuck to her cardigan. That girl would be never let a broken bracelet stay broken. She would be glue the beads back on with Elmer's glue and worn it proudly, scars and all. But the woman in front of me looked tired, her eyes hollow, like she'd given up on fixing not just the bracelet, but us. "Lena, wait," I started, but she was already zipping her suitcase, avoiding my gaze. "It's not about the bracelet," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "It's about us forgetting how to see each other. When was the last time we talked about something that wasn't Sophie or work? When was the last time you looked at me and saw me?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I couldn't remember. I'd gotten so used to the routine, the early mornings, the late nights, the polite small talk over microwave dinners, that I'd stopped noticing the way her smile didn't reach her eyes, the way she'd stopped humming in the shower, the way the bracelet had become just another forgotten object in a house full of them. She left that afternoon, taking only a few suitcases and a box of her favorite tea, the kind that smelled like bergamot, which I'd always hated but now craved. I stood in the driveway, watching her car disappear down the street, the bracelet clutched in my hand, its metal links digging into my palm. When I went back inside, the kitchen counter still had her coffee stain, a ring of brown near the sink, exactly where she always set her mug. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if it would fade with time, like everything else. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, spreading the bracelet's links across the tablecloth. 2 beads were missing, the third, the one from the sock, still hung on by a thread. I thought of Lena's words in the library, "Perfection is overrated." But we'd tried so hard to be perfect, to build the perfect life, that we'd forgotten to be kind, to be present, to be us. The bracelet's cracks mirrored our own, small at first, then spreading until they were impossible to ignore. I wondered if Lena had kept the first lost bead, the one from Christmas Eve, or if she'd thrown it away along with the rest of our broken promises. All I knew was that holding this bracelet now felt like holding a ghost, a reminder of who we'd been and who we'd failed to become. I tucked it into the same shoebox Mom had kept in the attic, next to the dried flour and the Cubs tickets, and closed the lid. Somewhere in the house, a faucet dripped, and the fridge hummed its quiet song. The silence was deafening, but beneath it, I could hear the faintest echo of Lena's laughter, the kind that used to fill this space with warmth, with life. Maybe she was right, maybe we needed a break, a chance to remember how to find each other again, like searching for lost beads in the dark. But in that moment, all I felt was the weight of the cracks, the ones in the bracelet, the ones in the counter, the ones in my chest. Love, it seemed, wasn't just about picking up the beads when they fell. It was about remembering to look for them in the first place, instead of letting them gather dust in a drawer. Part 8. Monologues in an Empty Bedroom. The first weekend Sophie stayed with me in the apartment, the air felt too still, like the silence had settled into the corners and refused to leave. My place was a temporary rental, all generic beige walls and furniture that smelled of detergent, nothing like the home we'd built in Connecticut, where every shelf held a story, every scratch on the table a memory. Sophie wandered from room to room, her sneakers squeaking on the laminate floor, until she paused at the dresser where I'd set the shoebox, the one with Mom's mementos and the broken bracelet. "Is this Mom's?" she asked, holding up the bracelet, her voice tentative, like she was afraid to touch a wound that hadn't healed. At 15, she had Lena's same brown eyes, the kind that could see right through you when you were hiding something. I nodded, watching her thread her fingers through the empty links, trying to fasten the clasp that hadn't worked in years. "She used to say each bead was a story from you and her," Sophie said, squinting at the missing beads. "Which one's missing now?" I told her about the first bead, the one that fell during Sophie's first steps, the one we'd found in my sock 3 days later. "And this one," she pointed to the bent clasp. I hesitated, then told her about the night in Connecticut, when the bracelet broke again, and how we'd both been too tired to fix it. Sophie tried to fit the lost bead into its place, her thumb pressing gently on the empty loop. "It won't stay," she said, frowning. "Maybe we need a new clasp," but I shook my head. "Sometimes things are better left a little broken," I said, though the words tasted bitter. Since when did I start believing that? She set the bracelet down, tracing the outline of the shoebox. "You know, Mom still has that photo of you two at the lake," she said, almost to herself. "It's in her new apartment, on the nightstand. She says it's her favorite, because you're both laughing like the world's not even a thing." I pictured Lena's new place in Maine, a tiny apartment near the coast, probably with windows that let in the salt breeze, maybe a few potted plants she'd finally have time to water. Did she still wear the bracelet sometimes, or had it joined the rest of our past in a drawer somewhere? Sophie turned to me, her expression serious. "Why did you guys stop looking for the beads?" she asked. "Like, not just the bracelet, but each other?" Her question hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. I thought of late nights at the office, of Lena's quiet sighs when I cancelled dinner plans again, of the way we'd both gotten so good at being responsible adults that we'd forgotten how to be kids, how to laugh at spilled muffins instead of calculating the cost of replacement. "I guess we thought we had to have it all figured out," I said, rubbing the back of my neck, a nervous habit I'd had since college. The house, the jobs, the perfect family. We got so busy counting the beads we had left, we forgot to enjoy the ones we still had. Sophie picked up the bracelet again, letting it dangle from her fingers. "Mom says life's not a math problem," she said, echoing Lena's old words. You don't have to solve every equation. Sometimes you just let the numbers be. I smiled, sad but proud. She was right, of course. Lena had always known that back when she laughed at the broken bracelet on Christmas Eve, when she turned a lost bead into a story of hope. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that lesson, too focused on building a life that looked impressive from the outside, ignoring the cracks forming on the inside. The apartment's heater kicked on, a low hum that broke the silence. Sophie set the bracelet back in the box, carefully arranging it next to the dried flower and the Cubs tickets. "You should talk to her," she said, not looking at me. "Not about me, or the house, or any of that stuff. Just talk. Like you used to." Later, after she'd gone to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at the shoebox on the coffee table. The bracelet's beads caught the light from the street lamp, faint but unmissable, like tiny stars in an otherwise dark sky. Sophie's words echoed in my mind. "Why did you guys stop looking for the beads?" Maybe she was right. Maybe love wasn't about fixing every broken thing, but about remembering why those things mattered in the first place. The bracelet wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a timeline, a collection of moments that had shaped us, the good and the messy. And somewhere, in a coastal apartment in Maine, Lena was probably holding her own set of memories, wondering if I'd ever bother to look for the beads we'd lost. I picked up the bracelet, feeling the weight of its imperfections, and whispered into the silence, "I'm sorry we forgot how to search." The words hung there, fragile but honest, like a first step toward finding our way back. Part 9. Mother's final words. Mom's hospital room smelled like antiseptic and lavender soap, a cloying mix that clung to my clothes long after I left. She'd been fading for weeks, but her grip on my hand was still strong that morning, her eyes clear as she motioned to the nightstand. "Take the box," she whispered, her voice raspy from too many days of silence. "Lena left it here, said it was time." The shoebox was the same one from the attic, its edges worn, the twine replaced with a simple red ribbon. I recognized it instantly, my heart skipping a beat as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among yellow letters and a single silver earring, was the velvet pouch, now even more threadbare, but still holding that familiar weight. But what stopped me was the engraving on the box's inner lid, tiny letters etched with care, 1985 Library, Blueberry Muffins, 3rd bead. I knew immediately what it referred to, the first bead that had fallen from Lena's bracelet the day we met, the one we'd never found that Christmas Eve. Except, we had found it, hadn't we? No, wait, no, that was the second bead, the one in my sock. The first bead, the one from the library, the one that started it all, we'd never recovered that one. Or had we? Mom coughed, pulling my attention back to her. "She came to see me," she said, her thumb brushing the back of my hand. "Right after you moved to Connecticut. Sat by my bed for hours, talking about you. About how you used to bring her coffee in the morning, how you'd stay up all night helping her rewrite her thesis." She paused, smiling faintly. She left this box then. Said it held the first bead, the one you thought was lost. I pulled the pouch from the box, and there it was, a cobalt bead, slightly smaller than the ones on the bracelet, a tiny chip on its edge, the bead from the library, the one that had rolled under the desk that rainy October day. Lena had kept it all these years, tied to the box with a piece of red string, like a secret she'd been saving for the right moment. Tears blurred my vision as I remembered the last time Lena had visited Mom, just a month before she passed. She hugged me in the hallway, her voice soft. "I'm sorry I haven't been around much." I brushed it off, too focused on Mom's hell, on my own grief, to notice the way she lingered by the attic door, like she wanted to say more. Mom's hand squeezed mine again, weaker now. "Love's not about the beads you keep," she said, her words deliberate, as if each one was a gift. "It's about the ones you return. The ones you hold onto, even when the bracelet breaks." Her eyes drifted to the bead in my hand, then closed, but her smile remained, like she knew she'd finally passed along the secret she'd been guarding. That night, alone in my apartment, I studied the bead under the lamp. The chip on its edge matched the desk in the library where it had fallen, I was sure of it. Lena must have found it that day, after I'd left, but never told me had she kept it as a memento, a silent reminder of the day we'd met, the day our story began. I thought of the bracelet in my own shoebox, missing that first bead for decades, and how Lena had entrusted it to Mom, knowing it would find its way back to me someday. She'd never stopped believing in our story, even when we'd stopped believing in each other. The bead in my hand wasn't just a piece of glass, it was a bridge across time, a symbol of love that outlasted silence, distance, even the cracks we'd put between us. Mom's words echoed, "Love's not about the beads you keep." She was right. We'd spent years counting what we'd lost, what we'd broken, but the truth was, the most important beads were the ones we'd never let go of, the memories, the laughter, the quiet moments that defined us long before we'd ever bought a bracelet or a house or a perfect life. I placed the bead next to the broken bracelet in my shoebox, the two of them finally reunited after 30 years. Somewhere in Maine, Lena was probably watching the ocean, her own memories like waves rolling in and out. But now, with this bead in my hand, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could start again, not by fixing the bracelet, but by remembering why we'd loved the beads in the first place, for the stories they told, the promises they held, and the way they reminded us that even when life breaks things apart, the pieces can still fit back together, scarred but whole. Part 10. An afternoon at the repair shop. The repair shop sat on a quiet downtown street, its sign a rusted gold cursive that read Elliott's Fine Jewelry since 1962. The bell above the door jingled when I stepped in, releasing a wave of smells, Polish, metal, and something woody, like an old humidor. Glass cases lined the walls, displaying vintage rings and watches, their faces frozen at timeless moments. Mr. Elliott, at least, I assumed it was him, looked up from a magnifying glass he was using to examine a pocket watch. He had a snowy beard and hands that moved with the precision of someone who spent a lifetime fitting tiny things together. "What be you got there, son?" he asked, nodding to the velvet pouch in my hand. I spilled the beads onto the counter, the 3 lost ones library bead with its chip, Christmas Eve bead with the scuff, and the sock bead with the wonky angle and the broken bracelet, its chain frayed, clasp bent. "These mean something," I said, lamely, as if he couldn't tell by the way I was cradling them. He picked up the library bead first, holding it to the light streaming through the dusty window. "Ah, vintage 1980s pressed glass," he said, turning it gently. "They don't make 'em like this anymore, too much character. Modern beads are all perfect, no soul." He set it down and reached for a tiny tray of clasps, sorting through them like he was choosing stars from the sky. I watched as he cleaned the bracelet's chain with a soft cloth, his movements deliberate, meditative. "My wife used to say I was a fool for fixing things that should stay broken," he mused, not looking up. "But I told her, every scratch is a story. Why hide them?" His words echoed Lena's from years ago, the ones I'd forgotten until Mom's box gave them back to me. He paused, holding the bracelet up to check the alignment. "You know, most people come in here wanting everything to look new," he said. "But the best repairs, they're the ones that say, I've been through something, and I'm still here." He pointed to a watch on the counter, its face cracked but still ticking. "See, that man brings it in every year to have the band fixed. Says it belonged to his grandfather, who wore it through the war. The crack that's where a bullet grazed it. Now, that's a story worth keeping." I thought of Lena's bracelet, how many stories its beads had seen: library floors, lakefront promises, Christmas chaos, silent kitchens. The cracks, the missing beads, they weren't flaws. They were proof of a life lived together, messy and beautiful. Mr. Elliot was right. We'd been trying to erase the cracks instead of honoring them. When he finished, the bracelet looked, not new, but complete. The library bead sat in the first position, its chip facing inward, a secret only we'd know. The other beads were spaced evenly, the new clasp sturdy but unobtrusive, like it had always been there. "Don't worry about the slight gaps," Mr. Elliot said, handing it back. "Gives the bracelet room to breathe, just like people." I thanked him, paid the bill cheaper than I expected. Maybe kindness has its own currency in places like this, and stepped back into the afternoon sun. The bracelet felt different in my hand now, not just a repaired object, but a bridge. For the first time in years, I didn't see the brokenness, I saw the journey each bead had taken, the way they found their way back to each other, just like Lena and I might. As I walked home, I thought of the engraving on Mom's box, the way Lena had kept that first bead all those years, trusting that someday it would matter again. Mr. Elliot's words lingered, "Every scratch is a story." Our story wasn't over. The cracks, the lost beads, the years apart, they were all part of it, threads in a bracelet that had never really broken, just needed time to be understood. That night, I packed the bracelet in a small gift box, lining it with the same yellowed tissue paper from Mom's shoebox. I wrote a note on a scrap of paper the back of an old grocery list, because some things are better for being imperfect, and tucked it inside. Found the first bead. Turns out, stories have a way of coming home. I addressed it to Lena's apartment in Maine, my hand steady for the first time in ages. As I dropped it in the mailbox, the sun was setting, casting long shadows that stretched toward the east, toward her. Maybe she'd open it and remember the library girl who laughed at spilled muffins, the woman who taught me that love isn't about perfection, but about having the courage to pick up the beads, no matter how long they'd been lost. Part 11. A postcard in the mailbox. The mailbox smelled of rust and autumn, that sharp tang of approaching winter mingling with the faint sea salt I swore clung to every piece of mail from Maine. I'd been checking it daily since sending the bracelet, pretending I wasn't waiting, that the nervous flutter in my chest was just the chill in the air. Then, on a crisp October morning, there it was, a thin card tucked between a utility bill and a flyer for a plumbing service, postmark stamped Portland, ME, October 15, 2023. Lena's handwriting hadn't changed, a messy, enthusiastic scrawl that looped around letters like they were old friends. The front of the postcard showed a watercolor of Lake Michigan's Ferris wheel at sunset, the same one we'd written on our first anniversary, when Sophie was still a kick in Lena's belly. I flipped it over, her words jumping out at me. Michael. The bracelet arrived safe. Thank you for the note. It made me laugh. Stories have a way of coming home, as if they ever really leave. Remember the blueberry ice cream truck by the pier? It's still there. Same cranky owner. Same melted cones that drip down your wrist like summer sadness. If you're free, Saturday at 3 I'll bring napkins and maybe a spare bead, just in case. L. P.S. was a tiny drawing of a muffin with a smiley face, just like the ones she'd scribbled on our thesis notes all those years ago. I ran my thumb over the ink, still slightly raised, as if pressing too hard could make the moment more real. The mention of the ice cream truck sent me straight back to 1986, the summer we'd spent saving up for that first bracelet, sharing a cone while sitting on the pier, Lena's laughter mixing with the seagulls' cries as the ice cream dripped onto her jeans. She'd claimed it was a flavor gradient, the melting blueberry merging with the vanilla below, just like our lives were merging, messy but sweet. Now, the postcard's edges were slightly frayed, as if it had taken a long, winding route to reach me, much like us. I wondered how many times she'd held it, debated sending it, erased and rewrote the words until they felt right. The L at the end was simple, but it felt like a bridge, a return to the nickname she'd used when we were young, before honey and dear became default, before we'd let formality creep into our language. The sea salt scent on the postmark made me think of her new home, the way she'd described Maine's coast in our rare phone calls. The ocean here is like a moody friend, sometimes calm, sometimes roaring, but always honest. I tried to picture her there, walking along the shore with that bracelet on her wrist, the repaired beads catching the sunlight off the waves, the first bead's chip hidden close to her heart. Saturday at 3. It was a date, of sorts, though neither of us would call it that. Just two people, older but wiser, meeting at a place where time had stood still in some ways, while rushing by in others. I thought of the bracelet in her hands now, how the repaired clasp would feel different, sturdier, but with the same weight of memories. Would she wear it to the pier, or had she tucked it away, waiting for the right moment? I set the postcard on my kitchen table, next to Mom's shoebox, where the third bead, the one from the sock, still lay, a spare just in case, as Lena had joked. The sun angled through the window, casting a warm stripe over the card, highlighting the Ferris wheel's tiny lights. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something beyond nostalgia, hope, cautious and tender, like a plant pushing through cracked pavement. That night, I dug out an old photo from the shoebox, Lena and me at the pier, 1986, her arm looped through mine, bracelet gleaming, ice cream cones in hand, both of us grinning like we'd just discovered a secret the world didn't know. We'd been so sure of each other then, so unafraid of the future. Now, the future felt less like a promise and more like an invitation to step back into the story, scars and all, and see where the next bead would lead. I went to bed early, the postcard propped on my nightstand, Lena's muffin drawing facing me. As I drifted off, I imagined a drive to the lake, the way the road would curve toward the skyline, the nervous excitement of seeing her again, the first words we'd say, maybe nothing at all, just a smile, a nod, the shared understanding that some stories don't need words to be felt. The postcard in the mailbox wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a thread, pulled gently but firmly, reconnecting two ends that had frayed over time. And as I fell asleep, I could almost hear the ice cream truck's jingle in the distance, mixed with the soft clink of beads, a soundtrack to a second chance. Part 12. Reunion at the ice cream truck. The lakefront breeze carried the same metallic tang of autumn I remembered, crisp and invigorating, with a hint of wood smoke from a distant bonfire. I arrived early, parking near the pier where the blueberry ice cream truck idled, its jingle a nostalgic hum that hadn't changed a bit. The owner, Mr. Delgado, still wore the same faded red apron, scowling at a teenager who spilled half his cone on the pavement. "Clean it up before the seagulls riot," he barked, but there was a softness in his eyes I recognized, same as always. I spotted Lena from across the parking lot. She was leaning against the truck, her posture relaxed, wearing a cream-colored sweater that looked like it had been borrowed from a cozy bookstore corner. Her hair was longer now, silver threading through the brown, but the way she tilted her head when she laughed at something Mr. Delgado said that was unchanged, a punch to the gut of memory. As I walked over, my shoes crunching on gravel, she turned, and there it was, the bracelet on her wrist, repaired but unmistakable, the library bead's chip glinting in the low afternoon sun. She lifted her hand in a half wave, a smile tentative but warm. "You made it," she said, her voice a little higher than usual, like she was nervous too. "Wouldn't he miss a chance to see Mr. Delgado's famous smile?" I said, nodding at the truck owner, who was now arguing with the seagull over a dropped sprinkle. Lena laughed. the sound wrapping around me like a familiar scarf, and suddenly we were 22 again, sharing a cone and pretending we had all the time in the world. He handed her 2 cones, blueberry, of course, and she passed one to me, our fingers brushing as I took it. The metal clasp of the bracelet scraped my knuckle, a tiny, electric touch that lingered. "He still remembers your order," she said, licking her cone, the blueberry sauce dripping onto her thumb. "1 blueberry, extra napkins, because the gentleman's going to make a mess." I laughed, fumbling for the napkins she'd already pulled from her pocket. Of course she'd come prepared, just like always. "I think he just likes bullying me," I said, but my voice was soft, thick with the weight of years and the sweetness of this moment. We walked to the pier, our footsteps sinking on the wooden planks, seagulls crying overhead, the Ferris wheel turning lazily in the distance. Lena held up her wrist, rotating it so the beads caught the light. "Mr. Elliot did a good job," she said, tracing the library bead with her finger. "I told him to leave the chip, said it gave the bracelet character." "You always did appreciate a good flaw," I said, thinking of the muffin incident, the Christmas Eve beads, all the ways she'd taught me to see beauty in imperfection. She glanced at me, a flicker of something in her eyes, gratitude, maybe, or recognition, and nodded. We stopped at the end of the pier, leaning against the railing, cones melting faster than we could eat them. The lake stretched out before us, waves lapping at the pilings, carrying with them the voices of kids skipping stones and a distant horn of a cargo ship. Lena pointed to a spot near the water's edge. "Remember when Sophie tried to feed a seagull her cone, and it stole her hat?" I smiled, the memory vivid. Sophie at 5, squealing as a gull swooped in, Lena chasing after the hat while I tried not to spill my ice cream. She cried for an hour, then demanded we name the seagull Thiefy McThieferson, I said. Lena laughed, a full-bodied sound that made my chest ache in the best way. For a while, we didn't talk about the big things: the separation, the years apart, the broken bracelet. We talked about Sophie's new job, about Mr. Delgado's retirement plans, about the way the lake looked exactly the same but somehow different, like an old friend who de-aged gracefully. And all the while, the bracelet on her wrist, the repaired clasp, the beads that had traveled through time and distance to bring us here, felt like a silent narrator, whispering the story we were too cautious to tell aloud. Lena finished her cone, wiping her hand on a napkin. "I kept the first bead, you know," she said suddenly, staring out at the water. "The one from the library? I found it under the desk that day, after you left. I thought, maybe it was a sign, that something good had started, even if a little piece of it was lost." I turned to her, struck by the vulnerability in her voice, the way she was sharing a secret she'd kept for decades. "Mom gave it to me," I said. "In her shoebox. She said you left it with her, all those years ago." Lena nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, which she quickly brushed away with a laugh. "Your mom always did know how to play matchmaker, even from beyond the grave." We smiled at each other, the air between us lighter now. the years of silence shrinking into the background like the fading Ferris wheel lights. As the sun dipped lower, painting the lake in hues of amber and cobalt, Lena linked her arm through mine, the bracelet's beads pressing against my forearm. It wasn't the same as the effortless intimacy of our youth, but it was something new, gentle, deliberate, a choice. And in that moment, with the ice cream truck's jingle fading and the first stars appearing overhead, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was a new chapter, written in the language of shared cones, repaired bracelets, and the courage to meet each other where we were scarred, but still shining, still willing to pick up the beads, no matter how long they'd been lost. Part 13. Footprints in the sand. We wandered along the shoreline, the sand cool and damp beneath our shoes, each step leaving a fleeting impression that the next wave would soon erase. Lena's arm stayed linked with mine, her warmth a steady presence against the autumn chill. Out here, away from the pier's bustle, the lake felt like a living thing, its surface rippling with stories only those who'd spent years listening could understand. Teaching kids in Maine, it's funny, she said after a while, her voice carried by the wind. They're so quick to panic when something breaks, like a torn worksheet or a crayon snapped in half. I tell them, look at it this way, now you have two pieces to make something new. She paused, bending to pick up a smooth stone, its surface polished by the water, and sent it skimming across the waves. I guess I needed to take my own advice, huh? I thought of the bracelet on her wrist, the way the repaired beads had settled into their new positions, imperfect but whole. You always were better at seeing the lesson in the mess, I said. She laughed, a soft, rueful sound. Took me long enough to apply it to us, she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. For years, I thought our story was over because it had cracks. But then I realized, cracks let the light in, you know, they show where the story was lived. Her words hung in the air, gentle as the mist rising off the lake. I thought of the years we'd spent apart, her in Maine, me in Chicago, both of us wondering if we'd made a mistake, if the love we'd once known was still there, buried under resentment and regret. But here, with the salt in the air and her hand in mine, those years felt like a storm that had passed, leaving behind a sky clearer than before. Lena stopped, turning to face me, her eyes searching mine. Do you remember when we used to make up stories for the beads, she asked. Like the one about the bead that traveled to Paris in a poet's pocket, or the one that became a lucky charm for a street musician, I nodded, smiling at the memory. Late nights in our tiny apartment, tipsy on cheap wine, inventing wild adventures for each little piece of glass. Well, I've been making new stories for the missing beads, she said, gesturing to the bracelet. This one, she tapped the library bead. It spent a decade in a shoebox, guarding a secret only two people knew. And this one, her finger moved to the Christmas Eve bead. It took a detour through a washing machine to remind someone that even lost things can find their way home. Her voice grew quieter, more intimate. But the best story is the one we're writing now, she said, her thumb brushing the back of my hand. The one where two people who forgot how to see each other, remember. In the distance, a fairy horn blared, its sound low and mournful, like a goodbye to the day. A flock of seagulls rose in a burst of white, their cries echoing across the water. Lena leaned into me slightly, and I caught the faint scent of her shampoo, jasmine and citrus, just like always, and something else, something salty and fresh, like the Maine coast she'd adopted as home. "We don't have to fix everything," she said, her words a whisper against the breeze. "Maybe we can just walk together and see where the path goes. Even if it's uneven. Even if we lose a bead or two along the way." I looked down at our feet, her boot prints next to mine in the sand, hers smaller, more delicate, mine broader but no more sure, and noticed how they overlapped in places, the edges blending into one another. It wasn't a perfect line, but it was ours. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. As we started walking again, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. Lena talked about her students, about the way they laugh at her terrible jokes, about the little blueberry bushes she planted outside her apartment. I told her about the attic, about Mom's shoebox, about the way sorting through memories had felt like untangling a knot I'd thought was too tight to undo. By the time we reached the end of the beach, the moon had risen, casting a silver path across the water. Our footprints stretched behind us, a winding trail that zigzagged toward the pier, where the ice cream truck's lights still glowed like distant stars. Lena took my hand then, squeezing gently, the bracelet's beads cool against my skin. "Thank you for coming," she said, her face half in shadow, half in moonlight. "For picking up the beads. For trying again." I raised her hand to my lips, kissing the back of her wrist, where the library bead rested. "Thank you for keeping them," I said. "For never letting the story end." And as we turned toward the pier, the night air crisp and full of possibility, I knew this wasn't a grand reunion or a fairy tale ending. It was something more real, more fragile, and infinitely more precious, a second chance, written in the language of footprints in the sand, repaired bracelets, and the quiet courage to love someone's scars, secrets, and all. Part 14. The Bracelet in Twilight. The sky turned a deep, moody blue as we settled on a weathered wooden bench near the pier, the kind that's seen decades of sunrises and goodbyes. Lena nestled into my side, her head resting on my shoulder, the bracelet's beads pressing into my arm like tiny, familiar whispers. The lake had calmed, its surface mirroring the first stars, while the ice cream truck's jingle faded into the distance, replaced by the soft lap of waves against the shore. She reached up, unclasping the bracelet with practiced ease, and held it between us, the beads dangling like a question mark. "Remember when you said each bead was a day of our future?" she asked, her voice low, almost lost in the breeze. "I used to lie awake counting them, wondering if we'd run out." I took the bracelet from her, feeling the weight of it, the repaired clasp, the imperfect beads as I slipped it over my own wrist. The metal was warm from her skin, the library bead's chip grazing my pulse. "Maybe futures aren't meant to be counted," I said, turning my hand to watch the beads catch the twilight. "Maybe they're meant to be lived, one messy, beautiful day at a time. Lena smiled, tracing the beads on my wrist with her finger. "You're wearing it backwards," she noted, but there was no correction in her tone, just affection. "The clasp is supposed to face inward, so it doesn't snag on things." "Maybe I want it to snag," I said, meeting her gaze. A reminder that even the parts that hurt, they're still part of the story. She didn't respond right away, just leaned her head back against my shoulder, her breath steady and warm against my neck. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, a low, lonely sound that seemed to echo the years we'd spent apart. But here, now, in the twilight, those years felt like a dream I was waking from, gentle and slow. "I used to think love was about having all the answers," Lena said finally, her words blending with the rustle of leaves from a nearby tree. "But it's not, is it? It's about standing in the questions together. Like why beads fall off, or why people grow apart, or why it takes 30 years to realize you were always home to each other." I thought of the shoebox in the attic, the way every item in it was a fragment of a life we'd built and rebuilt. The bracelet on my wrist wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a timeline, a map of where we'd been and a compass for where we might go. The cracks, the missing beads, they weren't flaws. They were proof that we'd loved deeply, recklessly, enduringly. Lena took my hand, interlacing our fingers, the bracelet's beads pressing into my skin. "So what now?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, like she was ready for whatever answer I might give. I turned to her, cupping her face in my free hand, feeling the softness of her skin, the slight tremble of her breath. "Now," I said, "we take it one bead at a time. No promises, no deadlines. Just today. And tomorrow, if we're lucky." She smiled, that same bright, ringing smile from the library, the one that had first stolen my breath. "I can live with that," she said, and leaned in, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that was both a hello and a thank you, a promise and a pardon, all wrapped into one. The bracelet shifted on my wrist as I pulled her closer, the clasp catching on her sweater, but neither of us moved to fix it. Let it snag, I thought. Let it leave a mark. Some things are worth the tiny hurts. When we pulled apart, the sky had deepened to indigo, the first street lights flickering on along the shore. Lena rested her head on my chest, and I could hear her heartbeat, steady and sure, matching the rhythm of the lake's waves. Above us, the stars were multiplying, each one a tiny bead in the fabric of the night. "I missed this," she murmured, her voice drowsy with contentment. "Not the grand gestures, but the quiet ones. The way you smell like cedar and old books. The way your laugh still makes my stomach flutter, even after all these years." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the jasmine of her hair, the salt of the lake. "I missed your muffin doodles," I said, and she laughed, the sound vibrating through me. "And your habit of leaving coffee stains everywhere. And the way you always know when to say exactly what I need to hear." We sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other and the quiet of the evening, the bracelet on my wrist a constant, comforting weight. Somewhere, a clock struck 9, but we didn't move. In this moment, time wasn't something to be measured or rushed. It was a river we were floating in, content to let it carry us where it would. As the cold began to seep into our bones, Lena sat up, stretching slightly. "We should probably head back," she said, but her tone was reluctant, like she didn't want to break the spell. I stood, offering her my hand, which she took, the bracelet on my wrist glinting in the streetlight. "Lead the way," I said, and she did, her fingers tight around mine, our footsteps sinking on the path back to the parking lot, the lake's dark surface a silent witness to a story that was far from over. Part 15. Moonlight in the Attic. The attic was bathed in silver moonlight when I returned, the same light that had spilled through these windows 30 years ago, when I first held that cobalt bead and felt time fold. I set the shoebox on the floor, its contents now complete, the repaired bracelet, the 3 recovered beads, Mom's dried flour, and the Cubs ticket stub that still had ketchup stains from that long ago game. I traced the engraving on the box 1985 library, blueberry muffins, 3rd bead, and smiled, thinking of Lena's handwriting, of how she etched it there with a nail file during a lazy Sunday afternoon at Mom's, back when we still believed forever was a given, not a gift. The velvet pouch felt soft in my hands, its color now more gray than blue, but the beads inside were unchanged, each one a tiny universe of memories. Lena was downstairs, putting on a pot of tea, her presence a warm hum in the quiet house. We driven back from the lake in comfortable silence, her hand resting on my thigh, the bracelet on my wrist a bridge between past and present. She asked to see the attic, and I led her up the creaky stairs, watching as she ran her fingers over the old yearbooks, the boxes of photos, finally settling on the shoebox like it had been waiting for her all along. Now, alone with the box, I lifted the bracelet, letting it dangle from my fingers. The library bead faced outward now, its chip visible but unapologetic, a testament to where we started. The Christmas Eve bead sat next to it, scuffed but proud, and the sock bead now slightly loose on its chain twinkled in the moonlight, a reminder that even the most ordinary moments could hold magic. I thought of our conversation earlier, how Lena had run her finger over the beads and said, "It's funny how something so small can hold a whole life." She was right. This bracelet wasn't just glass and metal, it was every spilled muffin, every late-night study session, every argument and apology, every moment we ever shared, broken or whole. Downstairs, the kettle whistled, and I heard Lena humming softly, a tune I didn't recognize but that felt familiar all the same. I tucked the bracelet back into the box, next to the first bead she ever lost, the one that had started it all. Maybe someday we add more beads, new memories, new adventures, but for now, the gaps felt right, like spaces for stories yet to be told. Dear friend, have you ever held something broken and found it more beautiful for the cracks that's the magic of this little shoebox, I think. It doesn't hold perfection. It holds us, the messy, flawed, stubbornly loving versions of us that time couldn't erase. The moonlight shifted, casting long shadows across the attic. I closed the shoebox, securing it with the red ribbon Lena had tied around it at the repair shop. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted, and the wind rustled the autumn leaves, a gentle lullaby. As I stood to join Lena downstairs, the bracelet's clasp snagged on my sleeve, just like it had that first night at the lake. I smiled, freeing it gently. Let it snag, I thought. Let it remind me that love isn't about smooth edges or perfect timing. It's about holding on, even when it hurts, even when the path is unclear, because the alternative, letting go, would be far more painful. In the kitchen, Lena handed me a mug of tea, her wrist bare for the first time in hours. Keep it for a while, she said earlier, about the bracelet. It looks good on you. Now, she leaned against the counter, steam rising from her mug, her eyes warm in the dim light. Ready to go to bed, she asked, and it wasn't just a question about sleep. It was an invitation to share a night, a morning, a life one bead at a time. I took her hand, the bracelet on my wrist clinking softly against her coffee mug. Upstairs, the bed waited, unmade but inviting, a space where we'd learn each other's new rhythms, the way she liked her tea now extra honey, the way I still couldn't sleep without a window cracked. As we climbed the stairs, I thought of the listener, somewhere in their own quiet space, maybe wrapped in a blanket, maybe staring at a ceiling, waiting for sleep. I hope this story had done what it was meant to do, remind them that broken things can be mended, that time isn't linear, and that there's a kind of peace in letting go of perfection. So now, dear friend, let your eyes grow heavy. Imagine the soft patter of rain on the attic roof, the distant crackle of a fireplace, the warmth of a story that's ended but never really gone. The bracelet in the shoebox, the beads on my wrist, the woman beside me, they're all here, safe in the quiet, waiting for the next chapter. Sleep now, and let the memories carry you, gentle as a lullaby, soft as the touch of a hand, sure as the promise of a bead that took 30 years to find its way home.